Hey, Ian.
Hi, Boatage. I hope I pronounced that as well as I can do.
Great. It sounds great, Ian. Thank you so much for being here. Welcome. I think we have a very interesting group. Our clients, I think it's our greatest asset alongside our team. So it's great to have you here, and I hope we can have an amazing next hour with lots of exchanges and lots of new content to everyone. Thanks, Ian, again.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Marcelo. And thank you to everyone at High Platform and High Academy. But most importantly, thank you to all of you. As Marcelo says, you are High Platform's most important asset. But I don't underestimate how important it is that you're giving up your valuable time to listen to what is a critically important subject to High Platform, to me, and I'm sure to all of you. In the next 40 minutes or so, I want to share with you some thoughts on the subject of customer journey management, something that is so critical to organizations around the world, but regrettably, something that many organizations are not doing particularly well. Everything I'm going to share with you is based on my experience working in more than 50 countries around the world, in almost every industry that you can imagine. And so it always gives me great pleasure to share my knowledge with all of you. Just to be clear, if you would like the material that I'm presenting, you would like to have it, I will be sending this to the team at High Platform, and I'm very happy for them to send it on to you. I'm a big advocate of shamelessly stealing. So if you can steal anything that I share with you today, I'm delighted for you to do so. To set the scene, I want to provide a little bit of background as to where the customer journey fits in. Because as I'm sure you're all aware, the concept of the customer journey is very well understood by many organizations around the world. The customer journey is not a principle that people don't really understand. However, there are many, many issues that need to be addressed. By the way, as I am sharing my thoughts with you, if you have questions that you'd like to ask me, please ask them. Put them into the Q&A function on Zoom, and then Marcelo will grill me a little bit later on. The first question I'd like you to digest is your organization clear in understanding what experience it needs to deliver to its customers? Every organization on the planet has always had a customer journey. The customer journey existed the day your organization was created. However, many organizations around the world have only recognized that fact in relatively recent times. And what that means is that most organizations around the world are actually delivering experiences to their customers by accident. The accidental customer experience is a strange expression, but the accidental experience is a reality if your organization has never actually defined what it wants the customer experience to be in the first place. How you want your customers to feel every time they interact with you across the journey. And so before I get into the important elements that we need to understand about the journey, it's really important for me to be clear that the customer journey is only one element of a number of competencies that define the discipline of customer experience. And if the customer journey is not connected to the other disciplines, the other competencies, you will have a very limited effect in being able to deliver demonstrable improvement to the customer experience. And so before I get into the journey, I want to impress upon you the importance of having structure and rigor to make the management of customer experience intentional. I am a huge believer in the need for an organization to have a framework to manage the customer experience, and the journey sits within that framework. If you've heard me speaking before, you may have heard me talking about a form of framework that I actually created 9.5 years ago to share knowledge with people all around the world. And the framework that I teach contains 3 parts to it: strategy, measurement, and people. I display the 3 parts of the framework as pieces of a jigsaw puzzle very intentionally, because a jigsaw puzzle is the perfect analogy for customer experience. Because to be able to build a jigsaw puzzle, the first thing you need to find are the pieces of the jigsaw. The customer journey is one piece of the jigsaw. Many of your organizations will possess many of the pieces of the jigsaw that are required. But the problem is, if you don't connect the pieces of the jigsaw together, you'll never end up seeing the picture representing the experience that you want your customers to have. And far too often, whilst those pieces exist, they're not being connected together. If I take this to the next level of detail, it looks like this. The strategy part of the framework is 3 questions. In principle, 3 very simple questions. Do you know who your customers are? Do you know what you want their experience to be? And does everyone in the organization understand the role they play in delivering that experience? Whilst these are 3 very simple questions, you may be surprised to know that many organizations find them difficult to answer. And that makes the second part of the framework extremely challenging, because the second part of the framework we call measurement, or the facts, because customer experience should be a fact-based methodology. And this part of the framework is where the customer journey comes in. Because whether your organization knows it or not, it is the customer journey that is bringing the experience to life for your customers right now. And this part of the framework is all about understanding how capable that journey is at meeting the needs and expectations of your customers. And the third part of the framework is as important as the other 2, because the third part is all about people. It does not matter how digitally enabled your organization becomes. You cannot deliver experiences without people. And that part of the framework is all about the creation of and sustaining of a culture, an environment that enables your people to think and act in the interests of the customer every time they do anything. And so I share this with you just to make it clear where the customer journey fits in. And as I say, the customer journey fits into that measurement part of the framework. It is all about our ability to identify facts. Because I said, in describing the measurement part of the framework, that customer experience should be a fact-based methodology. It should not be about gut feel. It should not be about opinion. What we ideally need are hard, cold facts that help us to understand how capable that journey is at delivering the experience we want our customers to have. When it comes to the journey itself, customer journey mapping is, without question, one of the most important competencies that defines the profession that customer experience has become. But it is a competency that many organizations think they are capable of managing, but unfortunately, many are failing to manage effectively. When it comes to mapping the customer journey, there is no one way to do it. If you Google customer journey map, which I'm sure many of you have done over time, you will find lots of pretty pictures flashing up on the screen in front of you. Some are very simple, some are very complicated. The fact that there are so many different interpretations of a customer journey validates that there is no one way of doing it. The problem with customer journey mapping is that far too often organizations are spending too much time and money creating beautiful looking pictures that get stuck on walls in offices and become dust gatherers, as I like to call it. I hope that translates into Portuguese. Customer journey mapping is not about creating pretty pictures. And this has been a huge issue over the last 5 to 10 years. Far too often, we are spending and investing huge amounts of time mapping journeys, but we don't do anything with them. And this is the vitally important point. Customer journey mapping is not about creating a pretty picture. And if you map the journey and do nothing with it, then don't bother mapping it in the first place. The reason that we need to map the journey is because we need to understand, as I've said, how capable that journey is at delivering your brand promise, at delivering your customer purpose. And your customers are having so many interactions with you before they become a customer, as they become a customer, and as you manage their ongoing relationship. How do we know which of those interactions works and which of those interactions doesn't work? How do we know which of those interactions is having the greatest detrimental effect on customer perception and, as a result, financial performance? How do we know where it is in that massive interaction that we need to focus our finite specialist resources to improve customer perception and financial performance? And that is why it may sound as though I'm preaching to you. And the preaching is intentional, because we need to re-educate the organizations that we work in that we should not be obsessing with mapping the journey. What we need to be obsessing with is managing the customer journey. Customer journey management is, in my opinion, the most important principle that organizations around the world need to get their heads around. This is what organizations need to seriously focus on adopting if they want to see measurable, demonstrable change. Customer journey management is a cycle of continuous interconnected activities. The interconnected activities that you see on the screen. And I just want to walk you through these activities to make it very clear what this management cycle entails. For the first step, I'm about to state the blindingly obvious, which is what I tend to get paid to do. The customer journey is called a customer journey for a reason, because it's a customer journey. Far too often, organizations are mapping journeys by product or by channel. This is not a product journey. This is not a channel journey. This is a customer journey. And if your customers can interact with you across multiple channels and across multiple products, it's vital that what you are visualizing is the omni journey, the omni-channel, omni-product journey. If you think about this by channel or product independently of each other, you will misinterpret the way your customers are interacting with you. So it is vital that you clarify who your customer is first. And that's why the traditional discipline of customer personas is very important as a precursor to visualizing the journey. When you've clarified who the customer is, then you can map the journey. Having mapped the journey, the next step is to measure it, because we need that measurement to help us to determine the small number of priorities having the greatest detrimental effect on customer perception and, as a result, financial performance. And when we know what the priorities are, then we fix them. And when we fix them, we go back around that cycle all over again and all over again forever. It is amazing how many organizations around the world have mapped their customer journeys once and never looked at them ever again. There are many organizations around the world who've been measuring the customer experience for years, but they still don't know what the customer journey looks like. If you prod and poke organizations hard enough, they'll tell you what their priorities are, but they never fix them. And this is why it is only when we can adopt this continuous, never-ending cycle of activity that we will be in a position to drive continuous improvement to the customer journey and deliver that financial effect that we're looking for. Not that you necessarily need me to, but I always have to make it clear that what you are now seeing on the screen is not a customer journey map. This, as I'm sure you are very aware, is a process map. Customers do not experience processes. They experience a journey. One of the greatest fundamental issues that I observe all around the world is that employees are so deep down in the detail of process, they can no longer see what the customer sees. And what we need to be able to do is to lift people's heads up out of the detail so they can actually see what the customer sees. Organizations have radically overcomplicated themselves. The customer journey is a visual representation of everything the customer sees, feels, hears, or touches. If they don't see it, feel it, hear it, or touch it, it is not the customer journey. It is a process. Processes represent the things that your people do every day. The journey represents what your customer interacts with as a result. And in a journey map, I only want to see what the interactions are. I don't want to know what it is that your people do every day. So I need to share the secret with you, the secret to the success of effective journey mapping to enable you to manage that journey to deliver measurable change. But don't get overexcited, because the secret is not complicated. In fact, the secret to the success of effective journey mapping is to keep it simple. And I don't mean that to sound sarcastic. I mean this sincerely. Far too many are radically overcomplicating the way they are mapping the customer journey. I know of a bank in Eastern Europe that has mapped 2,207 customer journey maps. I kid you not. And whilst I admire their work ethic, I can tell you now, it is a complete waste of time. When it comes to journey mapping, you need to be able to lift as far out of the detail as possible to identify what your priorities are. Mapping the journey for the sake of mapping it into granular level of detail is completely unnecessary. Journey mapping is so important because that map itself is a source of hugely important information. And if the world of business is going to become effective in the way that it uses the customer journey, that journey needs to become a living, breathing organism. This is not about creating a static picture. This is about creating a dynamic picture that becomes an instrument of change in your organization. It needs to live and breathe in everything that you do, from determining the priorities to becoming a record of exactly what is happening to your customer, to helping you identify ways that you can improve the organization, to becoming an essential tool for communication. If you're not using the journey in this way, if your journey has not been embedded into the way that you work, then that is something that you need to explore. And my friends at High Platform are perfectly positioned to be able to guide you to ensure that the journey becomes that living, breathing organism, that driver of change. So, customer journey management, critical. And I make no apology for repeating myself, because this is what customer journey management looks like, to remind you. And before I conclude my preach to you, there are a couple of other things that I'd just like to share. Because mapping the journey, as we've said, is vital, but we map the journey so that we're able to measure it, because we need the facts to identify the priorities for change. And I just want to share with you some thoughts on measurement that you may or may not be aware of. Measurement, as the next step in the cycle, is, in my opinion, the most important competency of all in the subject of customer experience. But regrettably, most organizations around the world are measuring the experience badly, ineffectively. And so I want to share some thoughts with you to help you consider how your organization is going about this. What I'd like to share with you first of all are some important principles of measurement, principles that you may not have considered before. The first principle is that what you are measuring from the customer perspective must be strategic. In other words, the way you are measuring the experience, the way you are measuring the customer journey must be connected to the overall objectives of the organization. Unfortunately, most organizational strategies have metrics written into them that only focus on what the business wants: profit, revenue, growth, return to shareholders. Very important metrics to the business. Far too often, the way we're measuring the customer experience, those metrics do not sit alongside business metrics in equal importance. If the way we're measuring the experience is not seen as equally important as business metrics, it will be very, very difficult to sustain the focus on customer experience. What we measure from the customer perspective must be actionable. It still astonishes me to this day that many organizations around the world are measuring the customer experience but do nothing with it. Either because the way they're measuring it gives them the impression that there is nothing to fix, or because they don't know what to fix. If your organization is measuring the experience in any way and does nothing with it, don't bother measuring it in the first place. The primary reason for measuring the experience is to help you determine what to improve. That's the primary measure. As I'm sure many of you appreciate, too many businesses have become obsessed not with improving the journey, but with achieving a score. And that obsession with the score has led to people focusing on a number, but failing to actually drive demonstrable change. The most robust way of measuring the customer experience would enable your organization to become predictive. This is the difference between being reactive and proactive. Most organizations wait for things to go wrong and then they try to do something about it, often when it's too late. Customer experience is actually all about the connection between cause and effect. What you do and the way the customer feels about it. And if you can create a measurable understanding of the relationship between cause and effect, you can actually predict how the customer is going to feel. And then the final principle I call sustained. Measurement, if it is done well, is the most likely mechanism to sustain an organization's focus on customer experience in the long term. Because regrettably, many are measuring the experience badly and jumping to entirely the wrong conclusion, measurement is not having that sustaining effect. So these are 4 principles of measurement that I ask you to consider. Are your organizations thinking about this in the way that they measure the experience today? As I describe these principles to you, I use the expression the most robust way of measuring the experience. And this is what I mean by robust. We should be capturing, listening to, and acting on 3 voices of measurement. VOC, which most people are aware of, is voice of the customer. VOE is voice of the employee. And VOP is voice of the process. Most organizations in the world are measuring some form of VOC. Just because they're measuring it does not mean they're measuring it well. Far fewer organizations are measuring VOE, and hardly any are measuring VOP. VOC represents the external perception of your organization's ability to deliver the customer journey. VOE and VOP represent the internal perception of your ability to deliver the customer journey. Voice of the employee in the context of customer experience is all about measuring employee perception of your ability to deliver the customer journey. VOC measures customer perception of your ability to deliver the journey. VOE is exactly the same thing, but from the employee's perspective. And voice of the process is where the magic happens, because voice of the process is all about measuring the cause that I mentioned a few moments ago. It is about having a measurable understanding of how capable your organizational processes are at delivering the touch points in your customer journey. There is a fourth voice that we must never forget. Because one of the greatest challenges that we face in the customer experience profession is being able to demonstrate the impact that improving customer experience can have on the business. And so the fourth voice that we must never forget, I call voice of the business. We need to be able to demonstrate the relationship between the measurement that we're putting in place from the customer experience perspective and how that has a positive impact on business metrics, things that the organization is interested in. And so to bring my presentation to a conclusion, I just want to stress the significance, the importance of that voice of the business. Because we must always be determining the return on investment for the customer experience, for improving the customer journey. And so I want you to be clear that improving the customer experience is enabled in two buckets. The financial return that you're looking for is two buckets of benefit. The first bucket is revenue generation. Revenue generation is all about putting the experience in. It is all about developing deeper, stronger, longer relationships with customers. That revenue generation benefit is the long-term financial return for improving the customer experience. It doesn't come in 6 months. It might not even come in 2 years. It is the long-term financial return. And so the second bucket is really important to understand, because the second bucket is the short to medium term financial return. And that short to medium term financial return comes through cost reduction. It comes through eliminating unnecessary cost in the customer journey. By removing the things that are going wrong in the journey, by eliminating the pain for your customers and your colleagues, your organizations can save millions. And that is the thing we must focus on as much as that revenue generation that comes in the long term. These two buckets are not exclusive of each other. If you just focus on cutting cost with no understanding of the experience, you will achieve your objective, but you will make the experience worse. Likewise, you could throw all of the bells and whistles that you want at the customer journey, but if you do so without any understanding of cost, you will create a journey that is not financially viable. We need to consider and understand these two things together. And what we need to make sure is that the businesses we work with and in understand that customer experience does have a direct impact on financial performance. And so the last thing I want to share with you is hot off the press. You may not have seen this because it was only released towards the end of last week. And remember, you will have these slides if you'd like them. But this is the latest evidence of the financial effect that customer experience can have on an organization. And you can see on this chart that Brazil is on here. This is a study that's been conducted by Qualtrics, and they have provided us with further evidence of the financial effect of delivering a customer journey that leaves customers feeling in a way that we don't want them to feel. Continuously improving the customer journey management will, if it's adopted in the way that I've described, deliver a significant financial benefit to your organization. I hope that you found what I've shared with you interesting. I hope you found it useful, and I would be absolutely delighted to answer any questions that you might have on this subject or anything else related to customer experience. So thank you so much for listening, and I will pass back to Marcelo to grill me with questions if questions have come through.
No grill at all. It was amazing. Thank you. We don't know how to clap in online sessions. I'm sorry.
Don't worry. No, it's not a problem.
But please feel our claps.
Thank you very much.
Bom, pessoal, então agora a gente tem aqui espaço para bater um papo com o Ian. Ele está à disposição para responder dúvidas, para interagir. Ele está aqui achando que ele vai tomar uma saraivada de perguntas. Eu já falei que a gente é bonzinho, que a gente vai só interagir. Então, fiquem super à vontade aí para fazerem as suas perguntas.
Hello, tem uma pergunta aqui do Maurício. Maurício, pode abrir o áudio e fazer a pergunta em português.
Oi, pessoal, tudo bem? Boa tarde. Oi, Ian. Como você vai? Tudo bem? Aqui é o Maurício da High Platform. Cara, primeiro, obrigado por compartilhar esse conteúdo incrível. É sempre muito bom ouvir você. Você falou um pouco ali umas comparações, né, em relação a investimentos em alguns mercados. E eu queria entender, no ano passado, antes da pandemia, você esteve no Brasil. Então, você conseguiu ver de perto como as empresas estão organizadas, como é que é esse mercado de Customer Experience Journey here. E eu queria entender como você vê, qual é a sua percepção, né, sobre esse mercado, o que nós temos a evoluir, quais são as principais dores e principalmente as principais diferenças entre o mercado brasileiro e europeu em Customer Experience Journey. É isso, obrigado.
Brilliant. Great question, Mauricio. Thank you so much for asking it. I was blessed to be able to get to Sao Paulo just before the world went crazy. So I'm so pleased that I managed to see it. And, you know, some of you may have heard me say this before, and I'm being entirely sincere in what I'm about to say, but that trip to Brazil blew me away, because whilst I've worked in over 50 countries around the world, it was my first visit to South America, ironically. And so I've seen customer experience evolving on every continent apart from South America. And so I was very interested to see what level of appetite there was for customer experience. And what I saw, I was amazed at the passion, the enthusiasm, the energy for customer experience. It is an attitude that I've only seen in a couple of other places around the world. I've seen a similar attitude towards customer experience in Turkey, interestingly. And I've also seen a similar interest in customer experience in parts of Africa. And what's interesting and a similarity between those parts of the world is that there are economic challenges, is probably the best way for me to describe it. And so whilst there are economic challenges, there is a real hunger to learn and a hunger to improve. And that's what I saw in Brazil. People were just, give me more, tell me more, keep telling me. And you must not underestimate how important that is. Because in other parts of the world, so if I compare that with Europe, or more importantly, with North America, there is an arrogance in North America. That desire to learn has disappeared. There is almost a conscious or a subconscious belief that we know all of this stuff already, but they don't. And regrettably, those markets that are supposedly more mature in customer experience are going backwards. And so I think that there is a real opportunity for companies based in Brazil to advance ahead of the US, ahead of the UK, ahead of Europe, and demonstrate that this is the way to build a sustainable business. And so I'm hugely excited to see what Brazil will achieve in the next few years. And as I said, I'm not just saying that because I'm presenting to a group of Brazilians. I mean it sincerely.
Ian, tem uma pergunta aqui da Paula Mirelli. Ian, você tem alguma característica do consumidor brasileiro que pode destacar que as empresas poderiam valorizar mais em comparação a consumidores de outros países que você já passou?
It's an interesting question. Being completely honest with you, Paula, I don't know enough about the Brazilian consumer. However, based on what I've seen, based on what I've experienced, I think there is a high level of empathy in Brazil, which again is not consistent in other parts of the world. And empathy is, to me, the most important underlying principle of customer experience. And I think obviously Brazil is such a diverse country, and diverse in terms of economic status as well, that empathy is really important in driving change, understanding how people feel. And what I will say, that the welcome that I had in Sao Paulo, I mean, it was like I'd known everyone my whole life. And I think that is a wonderful thing that Brazil needs to nurture and Brazilian companies need to leverage. So I hope that helps in some way, Paula.
Marcelo, com você.
Eu tenho uma pergunta aqui também. Eu queria saber como é que ele enxerga, ou na prática, como ele está vendo esse desafio de se olhar pela jornada como um todo, porque isso sempre foi alguma coisa muito fragmentada nas empresas, né? Diversas áreas, cada uma fazendo um pedaço. Queria saber, na visão dele, o que ele acha que é vital, o que é chave para que essa fragmentação não aconteça, mesmo quando você tem diversos departamentos como a gente tem em grandes empresas.
Again, brilliant question, Marcelo. Thank you for asking it. You're absolutely right. It doesn't matter where you are around the world. Siloed working is the norm, unfortunately. And the problem is that the experience that an organization delivers to its customers is delivered by the whole organization. It's not delivered by a department. It's not delivered by a silo. And that's why it is absolutely vital that when the customer journey is mapped, it is mapped by a representative cross-functional team. One of the weaknesses in the way that customer experience professionals have visualized the journey is that they've mapped the journey by themselves or with a very small team. And that gives the impression that the journey is theirs. But the journey isn't the customer experience team's journey, it's the organization's journey. And so it's vitally important that we have every function represented in the room when the journey is created. It has a really positive effect on engaging all of those different functions and departments together. But it's equally as important to come back to the first part of the framework that I shared with you, the strategy part, because this is also about accountability and adoption. Every function needs to understand that they have a role to play in the delivery of the experience, whether they face the customer or not. And there is a tool that I advocate called the Employee Hero, which is a tool that allows people to think about the role they play in delivering the customer journey. Because the analogy that I use in teaching that tool is that the experience you deliver to your customers is like a chain of events. And every employee in the organization is a link in a chain connecting your customer to your products and services. You only need one link in that chain not to understand their role, and the whole experience falls down. So we really need to ensure that there is an understanding of the definition of customer experience, that the experience represents everything the organization does that enables your customers to interact with your products and services. And that means that everyone from the CEO all the way down to the people that clean your offices have a role to play in delivering the experience in some way.
Great, thanks.
It's a pleasure.
Tem mais uma pergunta aqui, Ian, que eu vou passar do Fernando Shine, que ele mandou aqui. No Brasil, existe um processo de digitalização das empresas, onde muitas empresas estão com essa oportunidade na mesa de negócios. Por outro lado, há uma carência de profissionais na área de tecnologia. Como você entende que esse descasamento pode atrapalhar no desenvolvimento no Customer Experience e na criação dessa jornada do cliente? E como você enxerga que uma empresa SaaS, Software as a Service, pode contribuir e ser diferente nessa demanda?
Again, it's a great question, Fernando. Thank you for asking it. Digital technology is now part of our day-to-day lives, and the evolution of digital technology will only ever continue to grow. And there is no doubt that digital technology is essential in enabling us to improve the customer journey, in making the customer journey more accessible, easier for our customer, easier for our employees. But the problem is that the world, and Brazil is no different, has become very excited about digital technology, excited to the point of obsession, because far too many are misinterpreting the benefit of digital technology. And far too many are seeing digital as a way of cutting cost, as a way of eliminating human interaction so they can save money. But the problem is that because of that obsession in saving money, what organizations are doing is almost throwing digital technology at the customer experience in isolation of understanding what the journey is. And, you know, it's a phenomenon where business leaders will go to their technology team and say, I need an app, I need this. And the technology team are almost handcuffed to just do it, just make it happen. But very often they don't know, well, why? What do you need it for? How's it going to improve the customer journey? And we're throwing technology at the journey and actually making the journey worse as a result. And this again comes back to the importance of ensuring that when it comes to improving the experience, we mustn't start with the technology and work upwards. We need to start with the customer journey and work downwards. What we need is for the business to clearly understand how technology can better enable our processes to deliver the interactions that we want our customers to have. And technology companies have a vitally important role to play in this. But the technology industry has been very guilty of just selling the technology without clarifying to customers how it can better improve the ability of process to deliver the customer journey. Too many technology companies, I won't name any because that's unfair of me, they are just sales-led. But what they should be is partnering with their clients to help them improve the customer journey, not shifting stuff. And that mentality needs to change, in my opinion.
Ian, tem uma pergunta aqui da Juliana Fonseca. Hoje, os clientes podem comprar, ser atendidos e interagir com a marca em qualquer canal, o famoso omnichannel. Como isso facilita ou dificulta a experiência do cliente?
I think that the reality is that what organizations want to do doesn't necessarily match with what customers want to do. And far too often what we're doing is forcing customers to interact with us in a certain way, okay? But we're forcing them to interact with us in a certain way, again, because we feel that that benefits us rather than benefiting the customer. If I give you an example, I worked with a bank in Dubai, and someone who was in the technology team in that bank came up to me and said, Ian, I need your advice. I said, why? Well, we've just implemented a new chatbot on our website for customer service inquiries. Okay. But customers hate it. They absolutely hate it. Customer satisfaction is plummeting and we're losing customers. And I said, okay, so tell me more of the context. She said, well, we think we know why they don't like it. And I said, well, tell me, why do you think they don't like it? Well, when we implemented the chatbot, we removed the ability of our customers to speak to a physical human being. We took away the phone number from all of our websites, and customers can no longer speak to a real person. And I said, well, when you did that, did you do any research, any insight into whether or not customers wanted that, whether or not they liked that? No. I said, well, it doesn't really take a rocket scientist to understand why your customers aren't happy, because you're forcing them to do something that they don't want to do. Some of them might want to do it, but not all of them do. And you're now seeing the effect of failing to gather good VOC, customer insight, to help you determine how you should be effectively improving the customer journey. You've implemented that chatbot because you wanted to save money. That's why you did it, and it's made the experience worse. So again, it's just another example that, you know, we've got to make sure that that journey is almost the first thing that we look at before we determine any change that we make in the organization. Again, I hope that helps in some way.
Ian, tem mais uma última pergunta que a gente vai fazer aqui para você, para depois eu passar o microfone para o Marcelo para a gente finalizar. A pergunta do Drago: como gerenciar a experiência / jornada do cliente quando, em muitas oportunidades, a relação do cliente se inicia fora da empresa, em lojas físicas, onde ocorre a compra de um produto ou serviço, mas a continuidade da relação é com a empresa e não necessariamente com as lojas físicas, e sim com a empresa. Como gerenciar essa experiência jornada do cliente?
It's a very interesting question, and I'll provide a response, but I don't know enough about the circumstances you're describing, but hopefully this will help in some way. An expression that I use a lot, and this comes back to something Marcelo mentioned earlier as well, is I talk about the critical need to understand the end-to-end customer journey. And the expression end-to-end is an expression that far too many are not focusing on. Because when I say end-to-end customer journey, what I mean is, where does the journey start and end, not from our perspective, but from the customer's perspective. Okay, because far too often we think about the journey in our world. We're not thinking about it from that customer perspective. And there is a story that I share, which I don't have enough time to share with you now. But if you ever attend a masterclass with me, you'll get the opportunity to hear it, where I talk about the principle of wing to wing, which is a story about aircraft engines, bizarrely, which sounds quite odd. But the reason I share the story is because one of the world's largest manufacturer of aircraft engines assumed that the customer journey for repairing an engine started when the engine entered their factory to be repaired and ended when the engine left the factory to go back to the customer. But to cut a very long story short, the mistake they made is that that was not the way the customer was measuring it. The customer was measuring that same journey from the second the engine was taken off the wing of the plane to the second the engine was put back on the wing of the plane. And that length of time was totally different. And so that organization drew entirely the wrong conclusion. So even if your customer journey starts out of your control, you still need to understand, what does end-to-end look like from the customer perspective? And when you've understood that, then you may be able to determine what you could do in the future to better influence the parts of the journey that you don't have a direct interaction with today. So the final point I'll say, mapping the journey is about mapping it in two ways. The current state, what happens now, but we also need to be able to visualize the journey in its future state. And that future state is where you may be able to influence parts of the journey that you don't influence today.
Eu acho que é isso. Muito bacana a resposta, Ian. A gente aqui está chegando no final do nosso tempo. Eu quero agradecer imensamente aí a presença de todos, de todo mundo que veio participar, né, salvou um tempo na agenda para estar aqui conosco. A gente está muito animado, muito contente, vem muita novidade aí, então nos próximos dias a gente vai subir um site novo, a gente segue fazendo comunicações referentes aqui às nossas mudanças, que isso traz aí na nossa oferta. A gente segue divulgando conteúdos co-construídos aí com o Ian, a gente está animado aí com a parceria com ele. Então, bom, fiquem ligados aí nas nossas comunicações. De novo, meu muito obrigado a vocês. Ian, thank you so much. It was amazing, as always. I hope we can be together in next time soon. E eu desejo uma boa noite para todo mundo e até a próxima. Tchau, tchau.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.